Hi, my name's Paige Hollingsworth, and this is my audience for today.
You cannot make omelets without breaking eggs. You cannot have civil war without damage to something. That's a quote from Emmeline Pankhurst in her speech, Freedom or Death. She was a revolutionary suffragette who believed in fighting for women equality no matter the cost. And so she eventually founded a union that fought for women's rights and gave her speech to incorporate the sacrificial fight that she believed in. And so her passion for women's rights largely stems from her parents and her childhood and how she was raised. And so she was born in a loving family with two parents who were actively involved in social movements. And she grew up in a comfortable home. She was afforded a great education. But it always felt like her brother's education was worth more. It was seen as more valuable and more necessary. And so Emmeline Pankhurst herself, in her book, My Own Story in 1914, notes that it was this idea that gave her insight into incomplete ideals of gender relationships, even found within her own home. And from there, her passion to win gender equality stems from there. And so she goes on and she fights alongside her parents and in the social movement fight for women's suffrage. And so she eventually founded the Women's Social and Political Union, which believed in military tactics to ensure that their voices were heard. And so Emmeline Pankhurst, along with the other members of the WSPU, were prevalent fighters of the suffrage movement. And it was these very tactics that often made them the frontrunners of the movement. And so prior to her speech, Freedom or Death, the movement was often characterized by a lot of women going to prison. And in the prisons, they would go on hunger strikes so that they could tell the law that they couldn't oppress them any longer, that they refused to do that. And so the hunger strikes often led to prison guards getting angry, and they would violently force feed the prisoners. And so eventually the Cat and Mouse Act was passed, and this basically allowed for the women who were going on hunger strikes to be released from prison. And so essentially they would release them, and as soon as they got better to go back to prison, they would get arrested again. And it was just a long cycle of women having to serve their sentence, but always getting out because they refused to eat. And so Emmeline Pankhurst was one of the women who did this most often, but alongside her was Emily Davison, another important member of the suffrage movement. And one of the most defining moments of this movement was when Miss Davison ran in front of King George's horse while it was participating in the Derby, and she soon after died on impact. And so Emmeline Pankhurst, months after, gave her speech in response to this. And Germaine Greer at The Guardian, in an article in 2007, summed up Pankhurst's speech as an act of justifying militant tactics adopted by the Women's Social and Political Union. And so it is noted that Emmeline Pankhurst's speech, Freedom or Death, is in response to this act of military tactics and violence in the Civil War to win women's voting rights. And so the importance of this movement in turning the fight into something that is considered a war was displayed and encapsulated by her speech. And so Emmeline Pankhurst led to the promotion of the betterment of society by giving her speech of Freedom or Death, because it gave people a reason to believe that this fight was actually a war and not just rallies or petitions for freedom. In her speech, she used repetition of words such as militant, soldier, and battle to convey to her audience that this was actually a war, that women were fighting from oppression and inequality, and that they wanted the right to vote. And so also, this speech was just one part of the long-fought battle of gaining women's rights to vote. But without her, the connection between war and this fight might not have ever been made without Emmeline Pankhurst. And so, another quote from her speech: "We will put the enemy in the position where they will have to choose between giving us freedom or giving us death." And so, thankfully, this choice to give women freedom was ultimately chosen, and that women were given the right to vote in Great Britain and United States And this is largely attributed to Pankhurst and her passion for this movement and her willingness to sacrifice even her life for this cause. Again, this was greatly attributed to her family, and this passion stemmed largely from her own upbringing. And so she used her own life experiences in this movement for her social cause. Thank you.